Alan, thank you for your latest article for July. I thought it was very interesting, very well put. Very good points.
Thank you, Joy.
Yes, very good points. And I think it's important to say that, because a lot of people, and I did see it too, a lot of headlines that are saying we have now entered a war with Iran. But as you stated in your paper, we did not enter into a war with Iran. This has been an ongoing conflict. And before I even get into the ongoing conflict, I'd also like to say that constitutionally, Congress has never declared war on the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, the President of the United States can use force against foreign countries for 90 days before Congress has to approve it per the War Powers Resolution of 1973. So I just wanted to clarify that with many of our listeners may be aware of that, but I've seen comments out there, so just wanted to state that. But,
I'm sure that our listeners are aware that they're informed. A lot of them retired militaries, they're well informed about the way, in my view, and I think it's somewhat hard to argue, that Congress has just kind of deferred a lot of its power, especially in this area, to the executive. I'm of the view I wish Congress would reassert itself when it comes to war making. There are times of emergency or urgency where the executive has to act. I think the founders talked about that. The Constitution allows for that. But the War Powers Act, as you and so many listeners know, passed after the controversies over Vietnam. It's a very imperfect law itself. And interestingly to me, and I know this isn't the subject of our discussion today, Joy, but since you brought it up, the War Powers Act itself, which Congress wrote to try to rein in the executive, in effect concedes that the executive is in charge when it comes to military operations. And in effect, the War Powers Act itself concedes congressional authority. I would say probably too much, but that's a subject for another discussion.
Well, and actually, when I was looking this up, it was interesting to me that that Congress actually has not declared war since World War II.
Right.
Now, I understand there was some engagement in military combat that I read was authorized by Congress. So
yeah, there's a number of, nowadays we use the term authorizations for use of military force, AUMFs, which have the, I guess, effect of a declaration of war, but they really don't have the force or the full force of a declaration of war, which conveys, at least to me as a citizen, the idea that this is we're all in this together type effort. And I think Congress should reassert itself in that regard. Side issue, though, when it comes to this Iran crisis, which, as you mentioned, and as your readers may have seen, if they are starting to dig through their news sources after the long weekend, I make the case that we've been in a state of hostilities, at least, with Iran since 1979.
Yes, and I wanted to get to that, but first I'm going to say welcome back to our listeners. Welcome back to our Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I'm your host, Joy Votrobek, and back with me is our senior fellow, Alan Dowd. Thank you, Alan, for joining us.
Good to be here as always, Joy.
Thank you. And we are going to discuss Alan's latest article titled A Half a Century War. It is up on our website. It's also up on Substack, and you can find that at www.ascf.us. Consider joining our newsletter and consider donating. So, Alan, can you go more into these conflicts that have been happening since 1979?
Sure. Well, it begins with November 79, the violation of our embassy. It's a technical act of war. Now, it's not. I'm not suggesting that should have been responded with a declaration of war, but it was an act of war by a mob. Unleashed by this revolutionary force led by the Ayatollah Khomeini, and as our readers know, all American Security Council Foundation followers and members know, they held most of us have the numbers memorized by heart. 444 days, 52 Americans held hostage, humiliation for America. So that's where this conflict begins. We then have, I guess we could just talk about the Iranian side of the conflict. There's a U.S. side too. The Iranian-backed Hezbollah group attacks the Marine barracks in Lebanon. President Reagan dispatches those troops there, kind of an international call for help. Lebanon's a mess at the time, and U.S. Forces go there on President Reagan's authorization, and other Allied forces go to try to stabilize the mess that is Beirut at the time. We all know that story too, sadly. Few of us knew what Hezbollah was at that time, but 241 Marines killed in a targeted car bombing. Hezbollah gets on our radar screen. Hezbollah is Iranian-backed, Iranian-directed, Iranian-funded, and it continues to wreak havoc in the region and against U.S. forces for years to come. There's also an attack on a CIA station chief in Lebanon. He's kidnapped, spirited off to Iran, and killed, tortured, it looks like, to death. His name was William Buckley. There's also an American university in Lebanon employee who was murdered around that same time, again by Iranian-affiliated terrorists. 87, there's an Iranian-Iraq war is ongoing at that point, and Iran begins to sea mine the Persian Gulf. About a year later, the USS Samuel B. Roberts hits one of those mines, almost sinks. Extraordinary efforts by the crew and the officers of that ship to save the ship. 89, Iran-funded Hezbollah tortures and murders a U.S. Marine colonel who's serving as part of a UN peacekeeping force in Lebanon.
And Alan, going back to the mines in the Persian Gulf there,
yes.
I think you also answered to that side. I thought it was a great response by Reagan and how they handled the Iranian Navy after that. Right.
You speak to the point, and my article lays it out that this hasn't been a one-sided conflict. President Reagan responded in a couple ways to the Iranian mine laying and the Iranian, what you could basically call latter-day piracy in the Persian Gulf. And initially, he authorizes Navy SEALs to go after the Iranian naval assets that are seeding the Persian Gulf with mines. That there's basically Navy SEALs along with supporting aircraft take out at least 4 Iranian warships during an operation in '87, and then a year later, of course, Reagan really lowers the boom and hits Iran very hard. Operation Praying Mantis. A lot of your readers, I'm sure, know that operation. That basically, the United States sinks half the Iranian Navy in 8 hours, and puts Iran on notice that the mischief, the piracy, the mine laying is done. And of course, all this time they're threatening not just U.S. warships, but just international commercial shipping as they try to lay claim to the Persian Gulf. And that's the thing that your readers, most of them I'm sure know, and some who maybe are younger are learning, is this is a revolutionary regime that all of basically the rest of the Middle East has opposed in one way or another. The Arab states have all been opposed to the Islamic Republic of Iran since the founding of Iran because of its behavior, because it's fomenting and exporting this revolution, and through terror most of the time trying to spread its revolution. So you're absolutely right.
That I found interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
So you're absolutely right. The United States does respond to Iran's litany of aggression, and that's why it is, you could say, and I make the case, almost a 50-year war.
Yes, and as you mentioned, the piracy in the Persian Gulf. Now we're seeing in Yemen's or the Red Sea area with the Houthis.
Right. That's right. It's an extension, and Yemen, which is part of it, is occupied by Iran-backed Houthi, which is a political military movement that shares Iran's view of Islamist revolution. They are continuing that effort of committing basically piracy in the Red Sea against international shipping, which explains why the United States and a lot of our allies have been engaged in that region to try to protect international shipping. And to varying degrees of effectiveness under President Biden and President Trump, too, the Houthis have not been, I think, cowed or neutralized in any way. But that battle goes on.
Well, there was a little, I think, ceasefire there until our latest bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities. And I understand just recently a UK ship also was attacked.
Yes, there's been multiple international, I don't want to say, I mean, commercial shipping, and a lot of military assets who are there to protect the commercial shipping or try to protect them in a convoy fashion or such. I think, from what I understand, if you again, only open source materials is what I have access to, but the lost aircraft that we've had, I think it was on the USS Truman, was largely because of evasive maneuvers that the Truman was taking from Houthi weaponry that came really close, danger close, as they say, to hitting the ship, and ended up losing, F-18s that were on board. So that they've been very close to striking a U.S. ship. I don't know if you and I have talked about it, but some of your listeners may know that according to naval officers who are been engaged there in the Red Sea, they say it's the most intense combat for the U.S. Navy since World War II has been happening it's certainly a little cooler right now, but over the span of the last 12 months has been because of Iranian-backed Houthis, armed by Iranian and trained by Iranian forces. And as I noted in that article, getting Iranian intelligence from an Iranian warship that had been floating in the middle of the Red Sea, that conveying information on targeting data. So again, this is an enemy regime. I focus on it being the enemy regime, not the Iranian people. Right, but the regime is certainly at odds. And of course, when we get into the 2000s, there's a whole other list of things that I talk about in my article. But, they're directly responsible for at least 608 American deaths, U.S. troops that were stabilization force in Iraq that the Iranians had a direct role in killing.
And one of them I found interesting was the Saudi branch of Hezbollah, the pro-Iranian Hezbollah located in Saudi Arabia, that you had in your paper. Do you believe they're still there?
I don't know. My sense is probably not. The Saudis probably cracked down pretty hard when that 1996 attack happened against, I think all of your viewers and readers know, the Khobar Towers, some type of branch of Hezbollah, a Saudi branch. I suspect the Saudis went after them pretty hard. I know that after that attack, I don't write about this in that article, the Clinton administration kind of unleashed the CIA against Iran quietly in kind of a global dragnet or operation to get the Iranians to knock it off and try to stop them from targeting Americans. That had some effect, but that I don't write about that in that essay. But yeah, the Iranians of this regime is, I make it an enemy of not just America, but of civilization. And I think until that regime's gone, we'll have to deal with them in one form or another as a threat.
Well, it sure appears that Israel is working on that, and they'd like to see the same.
Yeah, that's right. I think that President Trump saw that the Israelis, and I'm sure his military advisors made it clear to him that that Israeli operation was very effective at taking out air defense systems, which, Joy, that actually began a year ago when Israel engaged in some counterstrikes against Iran's missile barrages. Israel kind of cleared the way a year ago for what happened, what began in June with what the Israelis, I think, call Operation Rising Lion. Yes. And I'm sure the president heard from his national security team that basically the skies have been cleared and the air defenses are gone. If we want to hit this nuclear facility, these 3 nuclear facilities, this is as good a time as any. And I think he took advantage of that, and I think it was a prudent move.
And in fact, I was going to just get to that and talk about that, because in your paper you had mentioned hold on, I'm sorry. It was an impressive display of U.S. military reach and restoration of some measure of our deterrence, and a setback for Iran's outlaw nuclear program. So.
Right. It was, when I say a restoration of deterrence, I think our deterrence had been America's deterrent, not capabilities, but the sense that our enemies have maybe about our deterrent capabilities might have been withered away or corroded a bit by our own actions in some regard. Basically, I think you could certainly say, starting with the Afghanistan pullout and then a long trail of, I think, warnings not really followed through on, and then I would submit, somewhat ineffective responses during the Biden administration. Then finally, the Biden administration did hit Iran pretty hard after Iran's proxies killed 3 American soldiers based at Tower 22 in Jordan, which was effective. But, deterrence only works if the enemy really fears you. I mean, the root word of deterrence is a Latin word, deterrio, which comes down to being afraid. So if they don't fear you, deterrence isn't going to be effective. But this may have restored some of that, which is good, and may have an effect other places too. But certainly, I think will have an effect in Iran. And the way the president has talked, and certainly we know it with the Israelis, that these two allies have worked together, and I think probably would again in the future if that nuclear program is reconstituted. I suspect that U.S. and Israel will work together again to knock it down again.
Yes, I think there's already talk of possibly allowing the Israelis to have the B-2 bombers in case Iran.
I've heard of that. Yeah, I've heard of that. I think it just seems to me that first you have to train them. Secondly, B-2s are highly, sophisticated and sensitive piece of equipment. Third, and maybe most important of all, we talk about deterrence. The B-2 is key to our own nuclear deterrent. Yes. We only have 19 of them active, I think, right now. So I've heard those reports. I just think that's highly unlikely. Makes much more sense, as the president did, just to have U.S. Airmen carry out that kind of mission. And I suspect we would do it again if we had to. But hopefully, the president has gotten Iran's attention. And Israel has broken down the Iranian military and IRGC capabilities enough that they'll allow international inspectors in, and they'll maybe stop pursuing nuclear weapons. That would be the hope, and this could, going forward, the way to keep Iran from going nuclear or to denuclearize Iran will be through the efforts of the IAEA and through negotiations and things like that.
Yes, definitely. And I agree with you with what you're saying with the B-2 bombers for Israel. I think it was very impressive reach, like you said.
Right.
From the
well,
US.
And I've heard people maybe more possible, I could imagine, is us lending or leasing a whole bunch of refueling aircraft. It sounds to me, if you read between the lines, that the U.S. and British were involved in a lot of refueling during June. We may get more information about that as it comes out, as we hear more and more about maybe as books are written about that operation, which was an amazing operation that Israel. Basically, what Israel did after October 7, 2023 until now was fight through 3 or maybe 4 levels of rings of what the Iranians call the ring of resistance. They fought through and knocked all those down, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis to a degree, and then all the way back to the Iranian homeland itself. Just really an impressive multi-pronged effort by the Israelis to defend their own existence.
Yes, absolutely. And like you said, and working with the Americans as well. That was all coordinated for us to be able to. For
sure, and especially in the defense of Israel, and French, American, British help over the last 2 years, almost 2 years. But hopefully there's maybe a light at the end of the tunnel for the region now. It does look like other countries are ready to come on board with the Abraham Accords, and maybe Iran will stop pursuing nuclear weapons. But again, this regime, I think the nature of the regime, that's the point that I make in the essay, Joy, is the very nature of the regime is the problem. It's not the kinds of weapons they have, it's their nature. And that's why as long as that regime is in charge of Iran, I think we will always have to be on guard, and Iran will always pose a threat.
Yes, very good points. And you also talked about the Abraham Accords, and you walked right into my next question to you, actually.
Well, we didn't coordinate beforehand.
No, we didn't, but that was very, very good. When in talking about Saudi Arabia and the pro-Iranian Hezbollah group that was there, and like you said, they probably did really crack down on that. Do you see Saudi Arabia being a help in normalizing relations there with maybe the Abraham Accords as well as maybe Syria?
I think that's the hope. A lot of analysts of that region make the point, and it's pretty compelling to me, Joy, that Hamas, backed by Iran, launched October 7 because Saudi Arabia was very close to signing the Abraham Accords back in 2023, which, as I think your readers and listeners know, this is basically an overarching peace program that began under the Trump administration, continued under the Biden administration, and now has legs again as Israel makes progress in this war of self-defense. So if Saudi Arabia were to come on board, that would be a huge, piece of the puzzle for the Abraham Accords and for a regional peace. And basically all it is saying is, these Arab countries agree that Israel has a right to exist, and we recognize it, which is, again, there's several countries have done that, which is good. If Saudi Arabia comes on board, that would be even better. Mm-hmm. I think Syria, its new government, is basically just trying to keep its head above water. The country is a shambles. It's broken and broke and divided.
Yes.
It's battered. But certainly, if Israel could get Syria, because of its geographic proximity with Israel and the threat it's posed for, since Israel's birth,
yes.
to Israel, and then Saudi Arabia, because it is the land of Mecca and Medina, and it's such an important symbolic place for Muslims, mm-hmm. And a leader of the Arab world. Those would be two huge steps forward for the Abraham Accords. But there's momentum for that, and I think Israel, with U.S. support, I think could maybe see this year some more countries come on board to the Abraham Accords, which is good for the region. And they start
yes.
to trade. Generally speaking, countries that trade don't go to war with one another. Of course, if you don't recognize a country's right to exist, it's real easy to go to war with it. If you don't recognize that certain kinds of people should exist, which is what the Islamic Republic of Iran thinks, it's very easy to try to do the things that they've done for decades against Israel. So hopefully there's like I said, a light at the end of the tunnel, or maybe some silver lining to the clouds, or maybe the storm clouds are starting to break. That would be a good thing to hope for. But the Middle East breaks the wrong way a lot of times, and hopes are often shattered. So
yes,
we need to
that's true.
Need to temper those hopes, I think.
And Syria does have a ways to go, but hopefully we'll see some progress there.
But the good thing on Syria, from Israel's perspective, from the perspective of the United States, from the perspective of countries that people of goodwill and peace-loving countries, it doesn't have the capacity anymore to strike Israel. I mean, that capacity's been taken away largely by Israel, fairly quietly. Israel, as soon as that Assad fled to Russia, Israel engaged in a massive air campaign that took out the remaining chemical weapons stores, the remaining aircraft, the remaining power projecting capabilities of the now dead Syrian regime. So
right.
That's a good thing. And hopefully they'll be able to make a real peace with Israel.
Yes, and we'll see how things fold out. Alan, thank you very much for coming on today. Thank you for this.
Good to chat with you as always, Joy. Always a pleasure.
Great paper. So to our listeners, please check it out on our website, www.ascf.us, and our Substack. You can subscribe, comment, and share your thoughts on our YouTube and Rumble channels. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and as I mentioned, the Substack. We're also available on audio podcasts on your favorite Apple or Android phone. So thank you again, Alan.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, join us again next time as we bring you the Peace Through Strength podcast.